Now, today I'm going to share the story of a young teenage girl who came probably to a gathering like this one day at 18 years of age. And this is her story about what she did after she had an encounter with Jesus. Many of us took some decisions here, but the proof of those decisions come with the choices that we will make later on. And I want to encourage you with this story. She was quite unassuming, very ordinary. In fact, if you saw her on a busy, crowded street, you would definitely miss her. She was short, but she had dark, piercing eyes. Now, had you the chance to actually have a conversation with her, maybe she's part of this, and you ask her about who God is and what she thinks about God's work, you would see this very small woman have this amazing transformation to become a giant of a conviction. Gladys Aylward, a small woman with a great God. Born in 1902 to a very, very ordinary working class family. She was the first daughter, the first child of Thomas and Florence Aylward. She had two younger siblings, Lawrence and Violet. She barely had proper formal education. By the age of 14, she was a maid in a rich man's house. But she had dreams, just like most of us. She wanted to be an actress. She wanted to be famous. And she loved the dances. She loved to go to the balls and to the dances. And so life went on. She worked hard during the day, and she went for the dances at night. Now, one fine day, she's all dressed and ready to go at the age of 18 in 1920. But because she's probably very small and tiny, and the street was pretty crowded that day, she got separated from her friends. And she just moved in a direction she couldn't find where the rest of them were. Embarrassed and feeling a little uncomfortable, she just went in the direction that most people were going at that time. And she finds herself in a hall, probably a church. Not knowing what to do, she decides to sit there in one of the last rows. And for the first time, these are her words, for the first time in my life, I realized that Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, died for me. It shook me. It moved me. And it was going to alter my whole life forever. Now, I want to ask you, you heard that Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, died for you. And you, and you, and you, and you. For Gladys, that was the first time that it shook her. And there, in that pew, she said, Lord, if you are real, talk to me, and I'm all yours. Like what Mohan said, it was all or nothing, and she went in all. Immediately she looked out for Christian groups that she could hang out with, because till now she only knew the dances, and she only knew friends who went to the dances. And she found a group that she could hang out with. It was the Young Christian Fellowship. And then she found a women's group, and so she joined there as well. Years went on, she getting very active in Bible study and in groups. But she was not just doing that on one day in an evening specially. She became what you call a rescue sister at the age of 18. She was helping girls in the unevangelized parts of England. Girls who made poor choices, girls who are trafficked. She started helping them out, rehabilitating them. What was her age? 18. And then one fine day, she gets a pamphlet in the Young Christian Life organization where she had gathered. And she sees on the pamphlet that China has a lot of unevangelized areas. And somehow there was this dead weight that sunk deep into her heart. She walked out of there wondering, what can she do? She had no formal education, let alone leave outside of the city of London. She didn't know anything else. And so what she did was, while she in the evenings went to help girls as a rescue sister, during the daytime she would go talk to as many educated people as she could. Doctors, engineers, professors, anybody with formal education. And she would go, sir or madam, would you consider going to China? God has use for you there. He needs someone like you there. She did this every single day of her life for 5 years. By the end, people thought she was mad. She had gone a little cuckoo. Because the burden was so heavy in her, she just waited to see someone go. And she said, I will work as a maid and I will support you, but can you go? Finally, her brother had come of age and she cornered him in the kitchen and told him, Lawrence, you go to China. I will take care of you. Lawrence was a simple teenage boy. What did he know? And he squirmed his way out. But before he dashed out, he looked back and he said this one thing to her. If you really believe someone ought to be going to China, why don't you go yourself? This was 1926. She says she does not know how long she stood in that kitchen counter, wondering, was God actually asking her, a nobody, to go to China? What did she know? And it was scary. But there came the next realization. And she prayed, Lord Jesus, if you will open the door for me to go, I, Gladys Aylward, will go. And the second decision, if you are asking me to do something, I will do it. I will never ask anyone else in my life to do something that you ask of me. With this resolve, this young lady plans for ways to go to China. And she hears of the China Inland Mission that was started by a missionary in the 1800s by the name of Hudson Taylor. And there was a group of women who were being trained as missionaries. So she saves up some money, some people help her, and she enrolls as a probationer into the China Inland Mission. Now what happens is, because she had so little formal education, as sincere as she was, the mission thought she was not fit to be a missionary. She was rejected. They said, don't waste your money. You can't survive China. You can't survive even a day there because you don't know the language. But the director was so broken by seeing her brokenness that he said, why don't you go and help a family of missionaries who just came back from China? And so she went and stayed with an old missionary couple by the name of the Fishers, Dr. and Mrs. Fisher. And when they saw her brokenness, they said, if God has called you to China, you pray. God will open the door. And that's what she did. One day, as she was sitting in church, broken-hearted, this weight getting heavier, how do I get to China? Who will send me? I've been rejected. But God continued to put that weight on her. One day in church, she hears two women whisper in the back that they had received a letter from an old missionary lady in China. She was praying for a young missionary lady to join her. And Gladys knew that God had asked her to sit in that church and on that pew to hear that whisper. The next thing she does is she finds the information to contact this old missionary in China, writes to her, and when she receives word that she's more than welcome to come, but there's no one to support her, she will have to buy her own one-way ticket to China. And from there, the little support that this old missionary lady has, she will take care of her. That was it. There was no promise of taking care of their old age, no promise of any backing at all. But Gladys Aylward remembered her prayer. Lord, if you ask me to go, open the door, I will go. No questions asked. Now, when she went to the travel agent, she asked, how much is it for a ticket? And the travel agent said, 90 pounds by ship, which is the best option for you. Or probably 47 pounds if you take the train. It was the Trans-Siberian Railway Network. So all the way from one side of Europe on the continent to the other side, which is part of Asia. And it was a long journey. And that was 47 pounds. And she said, I'll take the train ticket. I don't have the money now, but I'm going to work extra hard now. I have to buy that one-way ticket to China. And she worked hard. The only beautiful thing that she had was an expensive pair of leather shoes. So she decided that she's going to sell it and buy regular shoes. And so she went to the shop and sold it. And then she went to a shop where you get these leftover factory-made shoes. And then she goes there and she picks up a pair of shoes that fits her feet. Now, the only catch with that was the only shoes that fit her feet were 2 left foot pair. She put those, the shopkeeper asked, ma'am, that's not going to be very comfortable. She said, it's all for China. And she walked out of there with a little more money in her hand. Now she went back to work because she had to make money. She needed 47 pounds to buy that ticket. She had a goal. And as she worked, she went into working as a housemaid again in a very rich man's house. That night, as she sat in her room, she said, oh God, here's my Bible. Here's my money. Here's me. Use me, God. Now she worked hard. She calculated about 2 years of living and working to make up that amount. But while she was there, this thought came to her. If I'm going to have to teach the Chinese something about the God, I need to know the Bible myself. She had no one to help her this time. So she sat down and she said, Lord, you will teach me. And every day she sat with the word. Then the next thought came. There's no use of me calling myself a missionary and crossing all across to the other end of the ocean if I can't be a missionary at home. And so, on her free days, she would go to the preacher's corner in London. And because she was tiny, she would pull up a box, climb up on it, and practice preaching. There were days when she would have been heckled, days when she would have been mocked, but she was going to have to get used to it because she was going to China. But her resolve was still the same. Lord, here's me, use me. And finally the day came when she made up and she collected all of the 47 pounds. Standing on that train, waving goodbye to her beloved family, never knowing if she's actually going to ever come back. And she set out. Just to give you an idea, just look at the map from one end to the other. Good part of Europe was peaceful till they entered Russia. War was going on between China and Russia at that time, and this is 1930. Now, as she reached Russia, she noticed that she was the only civilian in the train. The entire train was filled with soldiers because they were going to war. And they tried to convince her to get off the train. But she said, no. Every day I sit on this train, It is one more day closer to China. When they reached Siberia, the train stopped. The soldiers told her there was no communication. She only knew English. And these Russian soldiers struggled to communicate with her. But they said, you need to get off now. We are going into battle. This train is taking us into the battlefield. You need to go. And she's like, into the nowhere? How? And they said, you need to walk 1.5 days back, follow the rail route backwards. October or November of that cold winter night, she picks up her belongings from the train and walks back. Siberia is one of the coldest and the most extreme climate place in the world. She barely had a rug on her, and carrying her luggage, she walked back. By the time she reached Chita, the town that they had left the previous day, she collapsed. Next crisis. She opens her eyes to realize that she's arrested. Now this is wartime and they need as many people to help them. These Russians looked at her passport and on it it's written, missionary. They have no idea what that word means. But the closest word to missionary was machinery. And they thought she was something like a factory girl who would help clean up the machines. And they arrest her. And they say, you're coming with us to Russia. Alone, cold, no language, and no one to ask for help. As she's sent into house arrest, she waits there and she does the one thing she knows, and that is to pray. Before long, there's a knock on the door. A small girl comes and says, you need to escape. I've seen many like you arrested and gone. They never come back alive. And she said, Lord, you called me to China, not to die in Russia. I need to leave. And miraculously, that little girl helps her one night. How, I don't know. She sees a ship that's going to Japan, and that girl leads her there. But as she's about to reach the boat, soldiers catch up. They realize she's missing. And they pull her out. And that's when she remembered that she had a 1 pound note in her pocket. She prayed to God again, took that pound and threw it in the air. For some reason, the soldiers let go of her to take the money. And that's how she escaped. All this for a young woman who was called to go to China. After a long journey, she reaches Japan, and from Japan she had to wait to get the permit to China, and then from China, and then she took the next boat to China and reaches the little town of Tianjin. Now, while there, she realizes that the old missionary who was there, she moved, and she didn't know where to go. Only an old Chinese man was waiting for her to say that you need to travel another week or so to get to the place where the missionary is. And finally, after taking a train and a long, uncomfortable journey by bus, she meets mules for the first time. That was her journey to the place called Yangchen in the province of Shaanxi. She sits on a mule, smelly as they are. These mules would go through mule tracks into the interior parts of China with coal, with food supplies, and with the things that people in the interior regions would otherwise not get. And that was her only mode of transport. And she went till she came to meet Jeannie Lawson, the old missionary who had been praying for her. Now, Jeannie Lawson was already 78 years old at that time, and Gladys was 30. Had they met anywhere in England, they wouldn't survive 2 minutes of a conversation together. That is how poles apart they were. But in the middle of nowhere, Gladys learned to submit to Jeannie Lawson. And Jeannie Lawson had this idea. Now, this is a time when the Boxer Revolution has happened, and the Boxer Revolution was when China decided to fight against the white people who were there in their country. And there was mass murder happening. And this is after that Boxer revolution that these white missionaries are going there. In the place called Yangchen, nobody had seen a white person. And so when they saw them, they were considered as white devils. They were thrown at, and nobody would listen to them. And they sat and prayed, asking God, how can they tell people about Jesus? And the Lord gave Jeannie Lawson a grand idea. You start an inn, a motel. The muleteers go by and they need to rest for a day. Do what others do and make your own clientele. Now when Gladys hears this, she says, I came risking my life, going through all those hardships to run a motel? How can it be? But then she again had to surrender and say, Lord, if you are asking this of me, I will do it. And so they start an inn called the Inn of Eight Happiness. Somebody went there in 2017 to look for this place. It's run down, nobody really lives there, but that place still exists. And it's called the Jesus Courtyard today in Chinese. And so they started with their humble beginnings. And the job that Gladys had, this small woman had, was she was supposed to step out of the corridor, stand on the road, and chant the first Chinese that she knew. And that was, we have no fleas. We have clean beds. Come, come, come. It's good, good, good. That was the first Chinese that she learned. And her job was to pull in the first mule that would come in, because the mules are stubborn. If the first one goes in a direction, all of them go in one direction. And the muleteers have no control. And so this small, short woman would stand out in the sun and grab off whichever mule that she would get first and then drag them into the courtyard. And these men didn't like them because these were white devils. But over time, these muleteers came back without persuasion because they got good food at affordable rate and there was entertainment. The Chinese loved stories. And Jeannie Lawson decided to tell stories from the Bible. And she was talking to them about a Jesus who loved them, about a God who saw them at their point of need. Close to a year later, once Gladys, the very girl who was rejected by China Inland Mission because she would never learn the language, had now become a fluent speaker of the dialect of that region. And Jeannie decided to move on to go to other villages to do the same. By now, Jeannie Lawson is 79 years old and Gladys is 31. But that journey of Jeannie's would prove to be fatal. She had a bad fall from the first floor and she didn't survive that fall. 1 year into Gladys coming to China, she was burying the only family that she knew. If you see, you can see Gladys sitting to the left with the coffin. Those men you see are the muleteers who came to their inn and a few of the converts that Jeannie Lawson had made along the way. Post the funeral, she didn't know what to do. There was no one to support her. And she again asked God, talk to me. I don't know what I'm doing here. That's when the government official of Yangchen invites her to meet with him. And she's like, I've got nothing to do with the government. I'm not going there. And when she refused to go, he came. And he stood in all his pomp and glory and he said, you know, China has banned the binding of feet. And she's like, okay, I want you to go and inspect the little children and free their feet. And again she's like, what? I've come here to save souls, not to work for you. And then that thought came in. Lord, if you are asking me to do something, help me do it. All unconventional things. And then there she realized, this is my opportunity, with acceptance, to go into the public. And she bows her head and she says, I will do it on one condition. You let me talk to those people about Jesus, and I will be your foot inspector. Now, what is this tiny feet concept that China had banned? At the age of 2, when little girls would learn to walk, the Chinese had this evil practice of binding their feet and tying it tight. They would live in that bind all their life. The Chinese men liked tiny feet, and they forced their women to have tiny feet. But what would happen is most often women would be crippled and terribly deformed. This is an adult feet that has gone through the trauma of child foot binding. And Gladys realized something. God called me to China not for my education skill, not because I was the most well-versed in any field, not because my hands were good to heal. He chose me because I have free feet and I could walk. And that is what she did. She went to village after village for the next 4 years, freeing little girls from this evil practice and healing many homes. And all along she had the chance of telling people about her beloved Savior. In the dialect they understood. And with the practice that Jeannie Lawson had left with her, she knew how to tell stories in Chinese. She told them about how God made little boys and little girls to run and be free, and for their feet and their hand to be free. And soon she was speaking into parents' lives. And very soon, village after village started abandoning their ancient rituals and their cultures, and many came to the saving grace of Jesus Christ. Now, this was in 1933. 1934, a terrible riot happens in the prisons. Now, the Mandarin has been watching. The Mandarin is the official's position for that government official who had given her this job of the foot binding. The Mandarin calls her and says, "There's a riot in the prisons, you need to go." And she's like, "What am I going to do in the prison?" And he said, "I don't know. I gave you permission to preach, and you say that God can do anything. Go and do it in the prison." And she's pushed into a prison full of crazed men. And what she sees is a terrible sight. One prisoner managed to get an axe in his hand, and he was going on a murderous rampage. There was blood all over. There were heads that were severed. There were a lot of wounded prisoners. And as this little white woman went into that prison and those officials shut the door, all eyes turned on her. And she did again the only thing that she knew how to do. And what was that? To pray. And she said, "Lord, you do it." And she looked there straight into the eyes of that crazy man with the axe. And as he came charged against her, she said, "Give that to me." What came about that man, God knows. But he quietly dropped the axe in her hand. And there started the prison revolution, the reformation that would happen in prisons, giving the men hope, teaching them a skill, and talking to them about Jesus. By now, this small woman was given a name in Chinese that was sounding closer to her name Aylward, and that was Ai Veda, the virtuous one. She was respected and she was loved, but she was still lonely. She prayed every single day that the Lord would send to her someone whom she could do life with. She longed to be married to someone who loved Jesus. But no one ever came. Once she told Elizabeth Elliot years later, "You know, Elizabeth, I prayed, and I know that God had a man for me too. But I don't know what happened. He never came. He never came." And that's when, one day in the marketplace, somebody calls her, and she looks down to see a girl filled with blisters on her body standing there. And there's a woman that says, you can buy this child. And Gladys says, I have no money on me. Whatever you have, you can buy. It was a child seller. That was the next practice in China, selling children publicly in the market square. Aghast at this, she put her hands into the pocket. She had 9 pence in her pocket. She threw it at that woman and saved the first girl child. That baby was 5 years old at that time. Months later, this nicknamed child called 9 pence brings another little boy home. And that child was named Less, because she told Ayurveda, if you eat less and I eat less, we can give him some food. And that's how Less came to be part of the family. Before long, Ayurveda had adopted 19 children. And these are the photos of some of them. Her life was full and beautiful. 2 years on, her family grew. But then the war between China and Japan intensified. And one day, planes flew above them in Yangchen. The Chinese didn't know what planes are. They were poor people. So they all went into the village square to see what was happening. And down came the bombs, killing a good part of the village. And that is when she decided that these are my people. She went and got her certificate. She cancelled her British identity and she said, I am one of these. And I will serve this group of people. From 19 children overnight, her house grew to 200 children, orphaned children. And she worked hard. But the Japanese were getting in, and life would never be the same again. It is at this time that the Mandarin called her again. And this was a very special meeting. Never in the history of China has the Chinese ever invited any outsider to their meeting, let alone an English woman. But while she was there, he thanked Ayurveda for her selfless sacrifice. But then he said, you need to leave. It's not safe for you. You are now wanted by the Japanese. And then he said the most wonderful things that Gladys would ever hear. I have watched you for the last 6 years, Ayurveda. And I've come to believe that the God you serve is the God I believe. He's real. And forced to leave her beloved Yangchen, she decides this crazy trek with 200 children. So they decide to split. The old cook Yang from the inn would take 100 children and travel first. She would wait for Yang to come back, and the next 100 children would be transported. Now, if you look at that, you can realize that most of those children were between the ages of 4 and 8. There were very few teenagers in that group. But old cook Yang didn't come back. And she didn't know what happened to 100 of her children, whom she had raised. And now she was forced to leave. The railways had been captured by the Japanese. There was no way to transport these children but by foot. And so Gladys started the journey. In between this, she got injured in an arrest. She was hit and bruised by the Japanese, and she had sustained an injury to her head. She also had an injury from the bombing. But there was no one to treat her, so she carried this scar with her. Traveling with these little children, she begins her journey. Meager supplies of food. A journey that should have just been 12 days long went in to be over 3 weeks long. They had to cross the Yellow River. But by then, the Japanese had bombed everyone in those villages near that river, that there was not a single boat to help them cross. Broken, tired, for the first time, Gladys cried. She said, Lord, it's too much. one of the little children reminded her of who her God is. And she said, "Ay, Veda, this is like the story of Moses. And that's the Red Sea." In her disbelief, she said, "Well, I'm no Moses, and this is no Red Sea." And the child quipped back, "But it's the same God. It's the same God." Quickly awakened, she starts praying. 4 days without food. They wait out in the open, just praying that Japanese would not pass over their area and kill these kids. And the Lord protected the skies. But they waited till some friendly soldiers came and helped them cross the river. But the journey didn't end. She managed to get a train, a cold train. For 1 day, she was able to rest. But Gladys by now was delirious. She was going in and out of coma, but the responsibility of these 100 children was upon her. The train stopped because the Japanese had captured and it wouldn't go forward. The next 12 days, they had to trek mountain ranges. Remember the age, ages 4 to 8. These children were crying, hungry, and tired. And one adult had the responsibility of taking all of them safely. 21 days later, they reach the first mountain village of Xi'an. She stands out and she cries inside, "Please open the door, there are refugees." And the call comes out saying, "No more refugees. We are full. We can't take any more." The children cry. And then she picks them up and she says, "Let's continue walking." 5 more days of walking till she reached the next gate and she shouted out, "Please open the door. Refugees have come." And this time the welcome news of, "Welcome to Fu Fang. You are welcome in." Gladys just remembers hearing those words and she fainted. For the next 1 month, she does not know how time went because she was diagnosed with typhoid and typhus. She had multiple injuries that would never heal, and she had been broken physically, mentally, and spiritually. There was nothing left of her after that trip. But the Japanese were still invading. She managed to get the rest of the children into the orphanage, but she had adopted legally 5 children. Those were her babies now, and she had to make sure she protected them. She moved into another place and raised them. One by one, she educated them, got them married off. She lived for the next 10 years, evangelizing villages of Xi'an all the way up to Shezwan, which is near Tibet. She worked with the lepers. She worked with whoever God brought her. 9 pens got married, and she became grandmother Ayurveda. Now that's when, unknown to Gladys, she had become very famous. The rest of the world was talking of a small woman who rescued over 100 children. And so a missionary family that had come by once met her and said, "Hey, have you met this woman named Ayurveda? She saved, you've been here long enough, I'm sure you've met her." And unassuming, Gladys looked back and said, "Yes, I know her. I am she." And on speaking to her, he realized that it had been a long time since she had gone home. Her children had all grown up, and they were in college or they were married. And with some help, these missionaries arranged for her trip back to England just once. And as she goes, it was again God's provision because the doors were getting closed in China. The Communist Party had come and taken on power, and they were killing and throwing away as many of the missionaries inside. Her aged parents waited at the railway station. They did not recognize their daughter. But it was a wonderful welcome home. Now, this is where she gets the opportunity. Once a rejected child, not a loved or not capable of being a missionary, was now being invited by church after church, meeting after meeting, to talk about Jesus and the work in China. And she made use of it. She spoke to the people of what the Lord was doing in China. But she longed to go back. And there was no way for her to go back because the doors were closed. She longed for her children and her grandchildren, whom she had so lovingly raised. But when China had closed its doors, she went to Hong Kong. And she got to see some of those children from the first 100 batch whom she thought had all been killed. She saw them there. Miraculously, the Lord had protected them. And from there, she moves on to Taiwan, Taipei in Taiwan. And in both these places, the Lord brought more children to her feet. In both Hong Kong and in Taiwan, she started children's homes, the Gladys Aylward home, freeing many homes of evil practices, freeing many girls from being bound in the traditions that would cripple them. And in 1970, at the age of 68, when she died, she had changed the world of hundreds of villages in China who would have otherwise never heard the gospel. This is someone who later on becomes a doctor. And he says, I am her son. And I was there to bury her. She's buried in Taiwan, in a church cemetery there. These are her words. I wasn't God's first choice for what I've done in China. I don't know who it was. It must have been a man, a well-educated man. I don't know what happened to him. Perhaps he died. Perhaps he wasn't willing. And God looked down and he saw Gladys. And he said, well, she's willing. Committed her life to Christ at the age of 18. Many of you all are of that age. Went through unforeseeable difficulties just to obey the call of God on her life. On her own, not a single person to support her, except the voice of God that said, go. I don't know what your challenges will ever be, but I want you to count the difficulties that she faced. And there is a call on some of your lives today. What will you do? Will you say the difficulties were too much? Or will you, like Gladys, come what may, tell the Lord, I will go. I will never ask anyone else to do what God asks me to do. Gladys Aylward, a small woman with a great God.